Russia has 1,674 deployed nuclear weapons. The United States has 1,770. Those weapons could launch in as little as 60 seconds and up to a couple minutes. 30, 40-mile wide mushroom cloud blocking out the sun. When you see the mushroom cloud, that would be people. 300-mile-an-hour winds, talking about people miles out getting sucked up into the nuclear stem. And that speaks nothing of the radiation poisoning that follows. There's this other insane concept called sole presidential authority. And you might think you can't just start a war. Well, you can just start a nuclear war if you're the president of the United States. In fact, you're the only one who can do that. We are one miscalculation away from nuclear Armageddon. No matter how nuclear war starts, it ends with everyone dead.
Of particular concern to me are people who believe it's God's will to destroy us.
Jonathan Hollerman, president of Grid Down Consulting, former military survival, evasion, resistance, and escape instructor, #1 best-selling author. Check out the Survival Theory, a Preparedness Guide, How to Survive the End of the World on a Budget. Survival Theory 2 is also out now.
It's hard to know what's true and what's not true. It doesn't matter what subject the media is covering. You just don't know what to believe. What the American people are unaware of is future warfare, is warfare in electromagnetic spectrum, and our enemies have the ability to completely destroy our electric grid. There is a very serious threat to our entire way of life, and that is a national grid down event. The America's Achilles heel is the high voltage transformers. There's about 3,000 of them across the country. They weigh about 400 tons each, built in Germany and South Korea primarily. Recently, we've been buying them from China, and they take on average between 24 and 36 months to build. There are multiple ways that we could lose those high voltage transformers. I would go so far as to say if we lose power for more than a couple months, it's probably never coming back on. This isn't really fear mongering, and what the American people have to realize is that there is no government plan, there is no military plan. FEMA has no plan for a national grid down event. We're headed towards World War III. It's probably going to happen in our lifetime. That would kill 9 out of 10 Americans within the first year. Sounds sci-fi, I get it, but the whole point of this was the media is not talking about it. The American people just largely have no clue the death and destruction that's going to follow this. There is not going to be any box trucks rolling down the road passing out MREs. You're going to be on your own.
I had such personal relationship with Trump as well. It is not about the personality of the leader. It is about the elite's mindset. The idea of domination at any cost, based also on forceful actions, dominates the American society. Nothing will change. It will only get worse.
I think I've proven myself to be honorable as well as also effective.
In our fight to secure our own human rights and recover our republic from the clutches of the dastardly elites and cold corporate shills who work hand in glove with organizations and agencies like the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, and the entire New York to Geneva organized crime racket that is insisting that the only answer to the poly-crisis of pandemics, bank failure, supply chain breakdowns, food shortages, cybercrime, racism, misinformation, and hate speech is for them to take over the world and exert full-spectrum dominance through global totalitarianism, which they call safety, inclusivity, equality. Everybody with a pulse knows they created every one of those crises. Oh yes, Armor of Truth Live number 301. Welcome. What are some of the threats that we're looking at today? Possible nuclear war. In fact, I'm convinced. You might not be. I'm convinced that we are closer than we've ever been to a nuclear conflict actually popping off. There are some unstable world leaders. You hear them say this now. You didn't hear them say it in the past. Doesn't mean they're going to do it, but it's a strange situation. I don't trust for a second our own leadership. So much less a nation like Iran, North Korea. In fact, you heard from Annie Jacobsen there in the beginning of the in that opening clip. And she was with Lex Fridman earlier this week, and she has a new book coming out. If you've never read her books, they're good. You know, she's done. Let's see, I'll tell you. Some of her books that she's done. Well, she's written about the CIA, KGB. She's written about Area 51, and the Roswell incident. She's written about DARPA. She's gone in and done. And when she does research, she interviews, I think, in at least in each of these books, at least 70 retired military guys and gals. So anyway, I like her work. It's some of the most detailed that you can get, and that was what she was able to come with. She got a new book coming out called Nuclear War: A Scenario, and she describes in the beginning of that book what it would look like if it actually happened. So we'll look at that again in just a moment. But the grid down scenario is another, and nuclear war could cause that. A nuclear weapon, nuclear bomb could cause an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse that could cause a grid down scenario. Of course, there could be a real pandemic of some kind. That could actually happen. Still, right, we're all traumatized from the lies, though, aren't we? And a financial crash could lead to something like this. But what was really stunning was what these scientists who are retired from their positions now, some of them who worked on the Manhattan Project, how they say that you could lose as many as 5 billion people, 5 billion people, if a proper, mutually assured destruction event happened. Russia launches. America sees it and retaliates. It's the craziest thing ever. In fact, let's go ahead and listen before I get into some of the other details. Let's get into, I'll let you hear some of the details that she says here about what it's actually like when this process starts. I'll tell you about what kind of satellite is in orbit now to identify when I'll let you listen. But some of the possible things that could happen. Well, the public is largely ignorant of any kind of forthcoming threats, specifically with this grid down scenario. We had Jonathan Hollerman on here 4 months ago, back in 4 or 5 months ago, back in November. And that is Armor of Truth Live number 270, I believe. Someone can verify that for me. I think it's Armor of Truth Live number 270. He's the guy to go to for this kind of information. And so we talked about preparedness too. So in this show tonight, we'll talk about, I'm going to give you a theology of nuclear war as well. How does, we're Christians, right? And we live out our worldview. Everyone has a worldview. But Christians know we have a worldview and we live it out. We evaluate everything through that lens. And so tonight I'm going to give you a theology of nuclear weapons. How does the fact that nuclear weapons exist fit in with the Bible? How does that work? Some people would say, right, there's so much evil in the world, there's no way a God could exist. Well, we'll talk about that. I'll help you understand how that plays out, what that actually looks like in the biblical narrative. Also, the truth movement is full of fakes, frauds, and grifters who take advantage of the general ignorance of the public every day. So we have to be very careful. We have to look out for our brothers and sisters out there. For example, the October 4th FEMA alert fiasco. Where's Jason Shirka? Where are these guys? Where are all those folks who are out there telling you that it was going to activate the nanoparticles that that tone that was going to come out of your phone, that was going to come from the towers. And where are they, right? Are we holding these people accountable? Does anybody go back after the fact? Well, that happened on October 4th, and it was October 6th or 7th, depending on where you were in the world, that the Israel-Hamas war started, or when Hamas invaded or just kind of walked into Israel. And so that took over the news cycle. So everyone just sort of forgot about all of those fakes, frauds, and grifters. So these are the kind of folks you have to be careful about, because they don't tell you the truth. They continue a narrative to keep you addicted to their daily content, whatever it is that they're selling. Like Jason Shurka, he's a new ager. He's going to sell you his consciousness plan about how to ascend and become a master of whatever. Also, our own government is not trustworthy right now. So that's another area of instability. Also, weaponized federal agencies, the FBI, labeling preppers, labeling Christians, as extremists. And while Congress wastes valuable time and resources entertaining the UFO cult, there is a very real and immediate threat that seems to be mostly unnoticed, at least by the mainstream media. And Annie Jacobsen's book will be out in a few days. Haven't got to read it yet, but did get to hear this interview. And I know her work very well, so it's at the back of her books, there's about 100 pages worth of documentation and notes, to follow up on these things. But I look forward to reading that, and after I do, I'll come back to you and give you some more information from that. But I do have some interesting stuff for you tonight. The sad thing is that Americans have been lulled to sleep by decades of prosperity. We've been seduced into feeling like it can't happen here. Now, we might have changed our minds since 2020, 4 years ago, right? Almost to the day, 4 years ago, that the scam happened. But we're also more shaky. We're also more paranoid than ever, right? Chasing shadows, seeking after truth in every dark corner. So we'll look at the Deagle report again in just a moment. We'll bring that back up for you. Take a quick look at the UFO phenomenon and the alleged nuclear arms interventions. And then we'll get to the point is, why in the world should Christians be talking about this? And why should we discuss, analyze, and critique, and then try to teach the scriptures using this as a platform, as a jumping off point? Well, it's called the cultural mandate. We always view all matters through the lens of our worldview, and that is the scriptures. So if we don't do that, then our view is going to be distorted. So the concept of a cultural mandate for Christians is often understood as the calling to influence the world positively, to steward creation, and to reflect God's character in every area of life. And I'll give you the biblical foundation for that in just a moment. But let's listen to some of these details. This is pretty interesting here. If you've never heard, the sequence, what happens, we've got, as you heard, there's 1,600, Russia has 1,600 nukes deployed. The United States has 1,770 nukes deployed. That means they're ready to go. And most of these can be airborne in less than 6 minutes. Some of them just a couple minutes. That means that once you get the alert, even if it's not a real alert, you have a decision to make. The president, who's the only one who can make the call, has a decision to make. He's got less than 6 minutes to decide, not only to decide whether to push the button, but to pick the targets. That's why they carry that football around them all the time. But listen to this. I think you'll find this interesting.
But it doesn't take too many people to start one.
In the words of Richard.
All right, hang on a second. What is going on here? Okay, there we go.
It doesn't take too many people to start one.
In the words of Richard Garwin, who was...
Boy.
Most people do not think about nuclear war on a daily
come on now. This is aggravating. All right, let's try again.
basis, and yet hundreds of thousands of people in the nuclear command and control are at the ready in the event it happens.
But it doesn't take too many people to start one.
In the words of Richard Garwin, who was the nuclear weapons engineer who drew the plans for the Ivy Mike thermonuclear bomb, the first thermonuclear bomb ever exploded in 1952, Garwin shared with me his opinion that all it takes is one nihilistic madman with a nuclear arsenal to start a nuclear war. And that's how I begin the scenario.
So some people, a lot of people today will say, they're all working together. Everybody, everybody from Xi Jinping to Vladimir Putin to Joe Biden, they're all working together. Right, to Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. Are you sure about that? I mean, are you willing to bank it all on that? I'm more skeptical about whether or not they're all working together or not. I know it's popular opinion, and we have a BRICS block now. We have the other blocks. But I think we have madmen out there today, and I think it could. And I think we talked about the other night. We were defending the nation state. So I think that the more we try to push for this global, to get rid of the borders, actually I believe that makes it more likely that something like this would happen, because you don't have the nation restraining the evil the way you do now. Okay, listen.
What are the different ways it could start? Like literally, who presses a button? And what does it take to press a button?
So the way it starts is in space, meaning the U.S. Defense Department has a early warning system. And the system in space is called cybers. It's a constellation of satellites that is keeping an eye on all of America's enemies, so that the moment an ICBM launches, the satellite in space, and I'm talking about 1/10 of the way to the moon, that's how powerful these satellites are in geosync, they see the hot rocket exhaust on the ICBM in a fraction of a second after it launches. A fraction of a second. And so there begins this horrifying policy called launch on warning, right? And that's the U.S. counterattack, meaning the reason that the United States is so ferociously watching for a nuclear launch somewhere around the globe is so that the nuclear command and control system in the U.S. can move into action to immediately make a counterstrike. Because we have that policy, launch on warning, which is exactly like it says. It means the United States will not wait to absorb a nuclear attack. It will launch nuclear weapons in response before the bomb actually hits.
So the president, as part of the launch on warning policy, has 6 minutes. I guess can't launch for 6 minutes, but at 6 minute mark from that first warning, the president can launch.
And that was one of the most remarkable details to really nail down for this book when I was reporting this book and talking to Secretary of Defenses, for example, who are the people who advise the president on this matter, right? You say to yourself, wait a minute, how could that possibly be? And so let's unpack that, right? So in addition to the launch on warning concept, there's this other insane concept called sole presidential authority. And you might think, in a democracy, that's impossible, right? You can't just start a war. Well, you can just start a nuclear war if you're the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States. In fact, you're the only one who can do that. And we can get into later why that exists. I was able to get the origin story of that concept from Los Alamos. They declassified it for the book. But the idea behind that is that nuclear war will unfold so fast, only one person can be in charge, the president. He asked permission of no one, not the Secretary of Defense, not the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, not the U.S. Congress. So built into that is this extraordinary speed. You talk about the 6-minute window. And some people say, oh, that's ridiculous. How do we know that 6-minute window? Well, here's the best sort of, hitting the nail on the head statement I can give you, which is in President Reagan's memoirs, he refers to the 6-minute window and he says, he calls it irrational, which it is. He says, how can anyone make a decision to launch nuclear weapons based on a blip on a radar scope? His words, to unleash Armageddon. And yet that is the reality behind nuclear war.
Just imagine sitting there, one person, because the president is a human being, sitting there, just got the warning that Russia launched. You have 6 minutes. I meditate on my immortality every day, and here you would be sitting and meditating, contemplating not just your own mortality, but the mortality of all the people you know, loved ones. Just imagining, like what would be going through my head is all the people I know and love, like personally, and knowing that there'll be no more, most likely. And if they somehow survive, they will be suffering and will eventually die.
So that also brings up for us now, very good. It's a good opportunity for us to talk about the difference in, imagine that does happen. How do you respond personally? How do you respond? What do you think? What goes through your mind? There's only one worldview. There's only one corpus, body of truth that has the answer to that. To die is gain. And how sad it would be, as you heard Lex talking there, daily he meditates on his mortality. Christianity is more than a religion. It's a life and worldview. It's a way of living. It's the truth, and it's the understanding that this is not the end. So it's interesting to listen to people talk about that and how it's a terrible thing for it to happen, but it's an opportunity for Christians to evangelize. Let's listen to just a moment. This topic is, and in a few minutes I'll get around to the theology of nuclear weapons for you. Let's listen to just a little bit about deterrence. Or let's do the nuclear football. That's a little more interesting. That satchel that the military aid, the mill aid, carries around with the president all the time. Every day, every night, all the time. It has to always be there.
Can you tell me about the nuclear football, as it's called?
I think Americans are familiar with the football, at least anyone who sort of, follows national security concepts, because it's a satchel. It's a leather satchel that is always with a military aid in Secret Service nomenclature. That's the mill aid. And he's trailing around the president 24/7, 365 days a year, and also the vice president, by the way, with the ability to launch nuclear war in that 6-minute window all the time. Okay. That is also called the football, and it's always with the president. To report this part of the book, I interviewed a lot of people in the Secret Service that are with the president and talk about this. And the director of the Secret Service, a guy called Lou Merletti, told me a story that I just really found fascinating.
Lou, how about Lou?
He was also in charge of the president's detail. President Clinton, this was.
Lou looks surprised, doesn't he?
Before he was director of the Secret Service. And he told me the story about how, he said, the football is with the president at all times, period. Okay. They were traveling to Syria, and Clinton was meeting with President Assad, and they got into an elevator, Clinton and the Secret Service team, and one of Assad's guys was like, no, like about the mill aid. And Lou said it was like a standoff because there was no way they were not going to have the president with his football in an elevator. And it kind of sums up, for me anyways, you realize what goes into every single one of these decisions. You realize the massive system of systems behind every item.
It's true. The massive system of systems behind all of it. But ultimately, it comes down to fallible, flesh and blood human beings at every level, even the president, to make that last call. And this is why I make comments like I did earlier that I don't think they're in sync quite as much as some people do, because people are flaky. We're all flaky. It's hard for us to remain consistent for very long on anything, and especially when you talk about the wicked in the world, those who have turned against God, those who deny Christ and have gone their own way. It's not easy for them to get along with other leaders in the world. And then you have Putin in Russia, who's of the Eastern Orthodox faith. I don't happen to believe that's an actual, at least from what you see from Putin and you listen to him in his interviews, I don't think that's believing Christianity, but they're denying some core some core doctrines. But there is God's common grace at work there, which is fascinating to think about. Otherwise, if God withdrew his common grace from the world at any moment, which, according to your take on Scripture, premillennial or postmillennial, you would believe that at some point God will withdraw his common grace from the world, and literally all hell will break loose. Families will kill each other. So, of course, nations will fight. So this is something to be thankful for, God's common grace, and that's ultimately what's restraining evil in the world, because we have weapons with the capability of finishing the planet. Let's see, let's check this out for a second. Yeah, it's just gonna sit there and spin for a while.
You mentioned the kind of nuclear war scenarios that the Pentagon runs. I'd love to. What do you know about those?
I mean, again, they are very classified, right? I mean, it was interesting coming across levels of classification I didn't even know existed, like ECI, for example, is exceptionally controlled information.
This is the one I want.
I'm looking for a hopeful thing here about North Korea. How many deployed nuclear warheads does North Korea have? So does the current system, as we described it, the interceptors and so on, have a hope against the North Korean attack? The one that you mentioned people are worried about.
So North Korea has 50 nuclear weapons right now.
Okay, so there's a point. North Korea has 50. We said earlier that the United States has 1,770 deployed nukes. These would be tactical nukes. These would be ICBMs. That would count as ICBMs. This would be the nukes that are on submarines. These are the ones that are ready to go. Russia has 1,600 and some odd. North Korea has 50. The other 9 nuclear nations together have about, including all the smaller nukes, about 19,000 altogether. And you're talking about some right down to the dirty bombs at that point. But they're everywhere. They're literally all over the planet. Well, let's listen to this. This is one of the big fears that officials have these days, is this thing that comes out of the blue that no one expected, right? But among nations who have signed the treaty, whenever they do a test of a nuclear missile or a platform that they're testing, they always tell each other when Russia does a test, they alert the U.S. When the U.S. does a test, they alert Russia. Still, to this day, that happens. But not North Korea. They don't alert anybody. You find out that they've tested a new ICBM or a weapon after they've done it. And so that's one of the worst threats, is that these things that could come out of the blue.
NGOs put it at more than 100. It's impossible to know because North Korea's nuclear weapons program has no transparency. They're the only nuclear armed nation that doesn't announce when they do a ballistic missile test. Everyone else does. No one wants to start a nuclear war by accident, right? So if Russia's going to launch an ICBM, they tell us. If we're going to launch one, and I'm talking test runs here, with a dummy warhead, we tell them. Not North Korea. That's a fact, okay? So we're constantly up against the fear of North Korea. In the scenario, I have the incoming North Korean 1 megaton, weapon coming in, and the interceptor system tries to shoot it down. So there's not enough time. And this, by the way, I ran through by all, generals from the Pentagon who run these scenarios for NORAD, right? And confirmed all of this as fact. This is the situation, right? So in the scenario, I have the nuclear ICBM coming in, the interceptor missiles try to shoot down the warhead. The capability is not like what's called shoot, and look. They can't, there's not enough time to go like, and we're going to try to get it. We missed it. Okay, let's go for another one. So you have to go, poof, 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 right? So in my scenario, we fire off 4, which is about what I was told, 1 to 4, because you're worried about the next one that's going to come in. You're going to use up 10% of your missile force, of your interceptor force on one, and all 4 miss. And that's totally plausible.
All right, so the thing there, that's scary, right? Because the point there is that we don't really spend a lot of money and effort on missile interceptor systems because they're not very reliable. And we don't, there's just, if one ICBM makes it here, that's bad news. I think that's what I wanted to hear next was, let's see, where it was the, what actually happens? Because that's what some people are skeptical about. People are going to be skeptical that, well, it's not going to be that bad. It's not good. We don't think it's as bad as they make it out to be. And I've been skeptical in my day of just how dangerous these substances are. But I have to be able to admit, we all have to be able to admit when we're out of our depth when it comes to some of these things. Let's see. President's cognitive ability. That's what I wanted to get to next. 109. Because that's really the point. That's what made me think about doing this show today was we're closer than we've ever been before to something like this happening. And it's because the leadership around the world is the weakest that's been in ages.
For that.
Not to be political and not to be ageist, but do cognitive abilities and all that kind of stuff come into play here? So if so much is riding on the president, is there tests that are conducted? Is there regular training procedures on the president that you're aware of? Do you know?
I don't think that has anything to do with ageism. I think it has to do with, I think it's an earnest question, a really powerful one. And if people were to ask that question of themselves or their sort of, dinner party guests or their family around the dinner table guests, you might come to a real good conclusion about how bad our political system is and how bad our presidential candidates are. Because why on earth there would be 2 candidates, one of whom has cognitive problems and the other of whom has judgment problems? These are the 2 biggest issues with a nuclear launch, judgment and cognition. And so where's the, young-ish, thoughtful, forward-looking, wise, dedicated civil servant running for president?
Dusty Devers. That's who she's describing. Just throwing it out there. She's describing someone like Dusty Devers. That's who she's describing. Right? That's exactly who she's describing. A man who doesn't stand a chance to get anywhere near the White House, but still.
No, that sounds, fantastical, but I wish it weren't.
So that's one of the things you should really think about when voting for president is this scenario that we've been describing, these 6 minutes. imagine the man or woman sitting there for 6 minutes waiting for the pot of coffee.
But I think about that issue with any war, right? I mean, prior to writing Nuclear War: A Scenario, I previously wrote 6 books on military and
There they are. They gave us a look at them here. Yeah. Area 51, An Uncensored History of America's Top Secret Military Base. Excellent book. And I'm telling you, these books are good because they're not speculation. And you might find them boring because there's not going to be a lot of speculation. In fact, here on the, let's see, Area 51, here's the Operation Paperclip. That book is fantastic. You want to know the truth. You want the gory details about not only that Nazi scientists were split up between the Soviet Union and the United States, but find out what they were actually working on. A lot of our medical system today, let me just leave that for you to check out on your own. That might be a little too grotesque for our show here tonight. But The Pentagon's Brain, that's DARPA, the book about DARPA. Phenomenon, this is the government's investigation into ESP. You know, this is like the men who stare at goats. Surprise Kill Vanish was about CIA operators, paramilitary armies, and assassins. Guys who go out and operate alone on a mission. These are the assassins. Excellent book. And First Platoon I haven't read. But all these others are good. In Area 51, she talks about the Roswell incident and the most likely scenario there. Obviously, it absolutely wasn't aliens. We know that beyond a shadow of a doubt. It was most likely a Joseph Stalin production of some kind. All right, so let's listen to Nuclear Winter, Surviving Nuclear War and Nuclear Winter. Let's see, 134. Cyber attacks. Let's do that too.
Football.
answer those questions, I interviewed a number of people, but most specifically General Toohill, who was Obama's cyber chief. And he was actually America's first cyber chief. And the nuclear command and control system, and really the triad, functions on analog systems. It functions on old school systems. If there's not digital interface, you can't hack into it, right? So most of the issues that I raise in the book have to do with what happens to cyber after a nuclear attack, right? Mm-hmm. What happens to cyber in the minutes after a nuclear weapon strikes America, and how that impacts the ability for people to communicate with one another. And that's when chaos takes control.
Well, let's talk about it. So, God forbid, if a nuclear weapon reaches its target, what happens? What, perhaps you could say what you think would be the first target hit. Would it be the Pentagon?
I was told by many people I interviewed that the biggest fear in Washington, D.C. is what's called a bolt out of the blue attack. That's an unwarned nuclear attack against Washington, D.C. The target would be the Pentagon. And that's what I begin the scenario with, And I reported in graphic, horrifying detail what happens. Yes, because I don't know what's worse, me writing that all out or the fact that it's all documented.
I'll just throw in right here the fact that the Pentagon didn't really, it got hit, by something. But the fact that it didn't get destroyed on 9/11 tells you a lot about what was going on there, who was behind that. But I digress. Let's not go down that rabbit hole right now.
By the Defense Department. I mean, they have been documenting the effect of nuclear weapons on people and animals and things since the earliest days of the Cold War. And all of the details I pull are from these documents like the effects of nuclear weapons. And again, this document was the original information, the original data in this document come from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? It was all classified. And then it was built upon by those 200 some odd atmospheric nuclear weapons tests we did. And we're talking about like millimeters and inches. We're talking about the Defense Department knowing that, 7.5 miles out, the upholstery on cars will spontaneously combust. The pine needles will catch on fire. They will start more fires. You have all kinds of mayhem and chaos happening based on reported facts from observations. And this is really shocking and grotesque at the same time.
So one warhead reaches the Pentagon, everybody in the Pentagon perishes.
180 million degrees. The fireball on a 1 megaton nuclear weapon is 19 football fields of fire. Think about that. Nothing remains. Nothing remains.
And there's then a radius where people die immediately, and then there's people that are dead when found, and then there's people that will die slowly.
Yes.
The eccentric rings.
And again, rings defined by defense scientists. But before that, the bomb goes off. Then there's this blast wave that's like several hundred miles an hour, pushing out like a bulldozer, knocking everything down. Bridges, buildings. I mean, you can read FEMA manuals about what the rubble will be like. You're talking about 30 feet deep rubble as the buildings go over 6, 7, 8, 10 miles out. That speaks nothing of the mega fires that will then ensue. So
hey, let's just be honest. That's Gaza right now. It wasn't even nuclear weapons, but that's what Israel's done to Gaza right now. And the world isn't really all that outraged.
All these people die. And 3rd-degree radiation burns. Did you even know there was such a thing as 4th-degree radiation burns? Right? We're talking about the wind ripping the skin off people's faces many miles out. And then you have a sucking action, right? Many people are familiar with what the nuclear mushroom cloud looks like. And its stem creates, and again, this is from, physicists who advise the Defense Department on this, the sucking up into the nuclear stem, 300-mile-an-hour winds. You're talking about people miles out getting sucked up into that stem. When you see the mushroom cloud, Lex, that is, in a nuclear war, that would be people. Those are like the remnants of people and of things in the cloud, 30, 40-mile wide mushroom cloud, blocking out the sun. And that speaks nothing of the radiation poisoning that follows.
And then the power grid goes out. Basically, everything we rely on in terms of systems in our way of life goes out. You write, quote, "Those who somehow manage to escape death by the initial blast, shockwave, and firestorm suddenly realize an insidious truth about nuclear war, that they're entirely on their own. Here begins a, quote, fight for food and water." I mean, that is a wake-up call on top of a wake-up call. That we go...
Yeah, but it shouldn't be at this point. It shouldn't be at this point. We should be taking it a little more seriously today. And I'm not as concerned about this scenario exactly as I am about just our power grid going down. Doesn't even have to be a nuclear weapon, right? Well, a lot of times we say, look at these fires in Maui, look at these fires in Canada, and people want to speculate that there are lasers from space, directed energy weapons, and maybe so, I don't know, but you don't really need to do that. One motivated activist and a Bic lighter can achieve quite a bit. 100 motivated activists, when in a time when they're not prosecuting crimes, you can create a lot of mayhem like that. But here's the nuclear winter section.
In part 5, you described the 24 months and beyond after this first hour we've been talking about. So what happens to Earth? Mm-hmm. What happens to humans?
Mm-hmm. So let me jump in before you get to this. Now, we covered here with Jonathan Holloman, what we understand is that if the grid goes down, it doesn't have to be a nuclear attack, doesn't have to be any radiation, but if the grid goes down, just the grid goes down, those big transformers that you saw in the opening segment. This is why you need to watch Armor of Truth Live number 270, where we interview Jonathan Holloman, who is an expert on this. He's the one who wrote the white paper for the government on this topic. Within a year, 90%, 9 out of 10 people in the United States would be dead because of starvation. Starvation would be what kills most people. And that's sobering. That's just if the power grid goes down. It doesn't seem like it seems like that number is awfully high, but when you look at how it breaks down and you read through that paper and you understand exactly the psychology behind it and what happens to people when they get hungry, what happens to people when their children get hungry, and how they begin to, things change fast. It wouldn't happen immediately if the grid went down. For the first couple weeks, people might help each other out, but soon after that, it starts to break down fast. And when you get to the 90-day mark, after that, deaths start coming quickly. It's a sad scenario.
If a full-on nuclear war happens.
Mm-hmm. So for that, I was super privileged to talk to Professor Brian Toon, who is one of the original 5 authors of the nuclear winter theory. Mm-hmm. And that theory was published in the early 1980s. One of Professor Toon's professors was Carl Sagan, who is sort of the most famous author of the nuclear winter theory. And, there were all kinds of controversies about it when it came out, including the Defense Department saying it was Soviet propaganda, which it wasn't. And what the nuclear winter authors conceded back in the 80s was that their modeling was just the best it could be based on what they had at the time. And so now flash forward to where we are in 2024 and talking to Professor Toon, who's been working on this issue for all these decades since, he shared with me how the climate models today, with the systems we have, the computer systems, reveal that actually nuclear winter is worse, right? So to answer your questions, the bombs stop falling. In my scenario, 72 minutes after they first launch. The bombs stop falling. And then the megafires begin. Each nuclear weapon will have, according to the Defense Department, a megafire that will burn between 100 and 300 square miles. So 1,000 weapons, 1,500 weapons, think about those megafires. Everything is burning. Forests, cities. Think about the pyrotoxins in all the cities, high-rises burning. And all of this soot gets lofted into the air. According to Toon, some 300 billion pounds of soot. And what happens? It blocks out the sun. And without sun, we have nuclear winter. We have a situation whereby ice sheets form. You're talking about bodies of water in places like Iowa being frozen for 10 years.
So temperature drops.
Temperature plummets, right? And there are all kinds of papers that have been written about this using modern systems. And the numbers vary, but the bottom line is agriculture fails.
Mm-hmm. Food obviously dies. So the agriculture system completely shuts down. So the food sources shut down. So there's no food, there's no sun, temperature drops completely, no electricity.
And we haven't even spoken of radiation poisoning because, the radiation poisoning kills many people in the aftermath of the nuclear exchange.
And that's where we'll stop with the clips now because, we're focusing mainly on grid down scenario here. I think we need to be paying attention. I think we need to be paying attention to this topic as well. But I think our first concern needs to be being prepared for a grid down scenario. That's the most likely thing to happen to us. And, in fact, if a nuclear exchange took place between the United States and whoever, that's going to be extremely ugly and unpredictable situation. Who knows? But we can prepare for things like a grid down scenario. And we should. And I'll talk about why you should. I'll talk about a biblical perspective on prepping in just a moment. But in our show the other night, I wanted to share some of this that Summer had prepared, some of these graphics and some of the topics, because this show was based on her research and her findings. So make sure you go back and watch our last show. I was looking through the old shows too. It's Armor of Truth Live number 270, where we interviewed Jonathan Hollerman. And right in that same time span, we also did some, I guess I could show you. Well, we did some shows on Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Hezbollah, and Hamas and Hezbollah coming across the southern border. A lot of good shows in that area there. But the reason I wanted to bring this up tonight is because I'm frustrated with Congress spending all this time chasing aliens. No evidence for any of it. It's a nothing burger for sure. And we don't have time for that. Why are we not having hearings, and why are we not putting that energy into working on preparing and solving a grid down scenario or something like that instead of chasing aliens? So one of the things that in Summers' research came up with was that the narrative out there is this. It's to make the nation state seem irrelevant. And one of the ways you do that is the nation state's dangerous. The reason we have the nuclear threat is because of the nation state. Not so at all. In this last show we did, AOT Live number 300, the Moloch machine, Silicon Valley's decentralized death cult. We made the case for you in that show that decentralization is not a better outcome. It's not a better solution than the nation state. And it's the reason why is because it never takes into account the heart, the sinful, wicked heart of human beings, the fallen nature of all human beings. And they give you universal assumed definitions of well-being and common good. They'll decide what the common good is. So make the nation state seem dangerous. And so we did a defense of the nation state in the last show. And this is one that someone put together as well, and I think this is excellent because Ram Dass, his theory, because when you look behind the movement for globalization and the movement from nationalism to planetism, you find there's a spiritual movement behind it. Even the Silicon Valley technocrats are very much interested in New Age. They're interested in Eastern mysticism, and they mix that in with their first passion, which is technology, and you have the modern techno-pagans. There's a show on our channel about that. We've got one. It's called the thumbnail says God Web. If you look through the Armor of Truth live shows, you'll see God Web. I'm just going to get the number. That's Armor of Truth live number 196. It's about online religion. And but there's a section in there toward the end of the show about techno-paganism. So, here's the idea that, people are basically good. We're all just walking each other home, and if you just meditate hard enough, everything's going to be just fine. Well, that system has been run, and it's been found wanting. It's not really an answer at all. Of course, UNESCO, the United Nations. The idea was, as Julian Huxley, the first Director General of UNESCO, to create a scientific world humanism. A world government will be necessary for the next stage in human evolutionary progress. One of the major tasks of UNESCO is a restatement of morality that shall be in harmony with modern knowledge. We can't be caught up in all these silly old religious ideas. That's what they say. Never mind the fact that all they're doing is recycling old spiritual and mystical ideas themselves. So as Christians, we have there's the concept of the cultural mandate. The cultural mandate it's understood as our calling to influence the world positively, to be good stewards of creation, and to reflect God's character in every area of our lives. It's all of Christ for all of life. 1 Peter 3:15. It might be 2 Peter. I always mix that up. Anyway, it's the verse. Well, I've got the Bible up right here. Let's just jump right over there. And let me pull that one up for you. 1 Peter 3:15. Who is there to harm you? If you're starting at verse 13. Who's there to harm you if you're zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you'll be blessed. And we know we're going to be. We know we're going to be persecuted. That was a promise from Jesus. Servant's not greater than his master. They didn't honor him. They won't honor us. Verse 15. It says, have no fear of them, nor be troubled. Verse 15. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy. That means all of Christ for all of life, not just on Sundays, not just when you feel like it, not just in your spiritual life, but in your life at work, in your recreation, in your marriage, obviously, in your relationships with people. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. And there we are. There's our mandate. That's how we respond. Having a good conscience so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. And that's why we hold our own. That's why we hold our patience. Genesis 1, 26 and 28, this is in the creation mandate. These verses describe God's command to humankind to have dominion over the earth and to subdue it, indicating a responsibility towards creation. This passage is foundational for understanding the cultural mandate as it establishes humanity's role as caretakers and stewards of the earth. Now, stay tuned. I'm going to get to the theology of nuclear war in just a moment. I just thought I'd share this with you for fun since we're here. This one's huge, folks.
Billions and billions and billions and...
Yeah, all right. It's huge. Yeah, I was just trying to find something to keep on the screen. Matthew 5, 13 through 16. This is the salt and light passage. Jesus calls his followers to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. There we go. That's a little better, isn't it? Than Trump. I don't need Ram Dass there either. What these guys? Salt of the light, salt of the earth, and light of the world. So Jesus has encouraged all those who follow him to influence the world positively through our actions and our words. This is really important when it comes time to, when we see something that needs to be responded to, or when someone tries to provoke us, we can't take that bait. Nate Sala on the Wise Disciple channel last week did an excellent Bible study on Proverbs 9. I believe it's Proverbs 9, yeah. About, we see a lot of people today, a lot of Christians getting involved in the public square, getting involved with firing back and stooping to the same tactics as those who would presume to oppress us. But we can't do that. We don't get to do that. Matthew 28, 18 through 20, this is the Great Commission. The passage commands followers of Christ to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to obey. That's primarily teaching them to obey all that Jesus has commanded. That's a global mission. It's not only evangelism, but it's also the teaching and influencing of societies through our life, the way we live our lives. Jeremiah 29:7, we are to seek the welfare of the city. So in the context here, the Israelites in exile were instructed to seek the welfare of the city where they have been sent and to pray to the Lord on the city's behalf. If you're in Babylon, pray for Babylon. If you're in the United States, pray for your leaders here. This verse highlights the importance of contributing to the common good, the true common good and welfare of the society, even when you're in a foreign land, even if you're in exile or you're in slavery as the Israelites were. Colossians 3:23 and 24, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord. Paul instructs believers to do everything as for the Lord and not for men, indicating that every area of life, including work and cultural engagement, is an arena, is an opportunity for serving God. Micah 6:8, act justly, love, mercy, walk humbly. This verse summarizes God's requirements for his people to act justly. It emphasizes the ethical and moral dimensions of the cultural mandate, including justice, compassion, and humility. So these verses, just these few verses here, collectively support the idea of a cultural mandate, just proving the fact, because you'll hear people will criticize us for getting involved in politics, for getting involved in the world. Well, listen, if we're Christians, we're here on a rescue mission. You're like a fireman. You can't drive by a house on fire if you're a fireman. Your job is to go in and save lives. Now, what about a theology of nuclear weapons? So in the shadow of this age we're in, this nuclear age, nuclear weaponry, the ethics and theological implications are a challenge to the conscience of Christians worldwide today. Specifically when you come down to issues on God's sovereignty, human sinfulness, the call for redemption, and stewardship of the earth. So, nuclear weapons, these monumental instruments of war. How do we think about that in terms of, in a theological framework? How do we grasp the ethical implications on contemporary Christians with this kind of destruction at our fingertips? Right? Is it true? Is it the case that mankind is out of control? Well, at the core of our theology is the affirmation of God's absolute sovereignty. It means he's sovereign over who is saved, who is not. He's sovereign over what happens in every last detail. God governs all events in human history. And he governs them with wisdom, power, and justice. So the existence and potential use of nuclear weapons has to be understood within the context of God's sovereign will. That's the only way to think about it. Because if you start thinking that, well, mankind has gotten out of control and God turned his back for a minute and now look what we've got all these weapons. Well, what does this actually say about human agency and divine providence? Ethical responsibilities of nation states and individuals wielding such power. First of all, what we have to get straight right out the gate is the doctrine of total depravity. That's what underscores that's how we understand what it means to be fallen, the innate sinfulness of humanity that affects every aspect of the human condition, the intellect, the body, all of it. This theological insight casts a shadow on the human capacity to manage the destructive potential of nuclear weapons ethically. Right, the only reason that we haven't destroyed the place already is, as we said earlier, God's common grace. So our propensity for sin, our depravity, raises doubts about the moral justification for even the existence of nuclear weapons and the likelihood of their use, because their use would certainly reflect the corrupted nature of human intent and decision-making. God has made a covenant with his people. He's made a covenant with the earth. The covenantal call to love God and neighbor, Deuteronomy 6, stands in stark contrast to the destructive potential of nuclear weapons, challenging their compatibility with the covenantal obligations of justice, mercy, and stewardship. Also, there's the just war theory that was put forth by the reformers put forth by Rushdoony and others. Just war theory provides a framework for evaluating the morality of war, and by extension, the use of nuclear weapons. So the principles of just cause, proportionality, for example, in Israel. Let's talk about just war theory in the context of Israel for a moment. All right, so Israel is, let's just take it, there's plenty of things that have happened over the years where Israel has been the victim and the aggressor. Let's just start with Hamas coming across the border. Whatever happened, seems like they were just kind of allowed to come across, but let's set that aside for now. And let's say 200 Israelis were killed. I don't remember the number exactly, but let's just say 200. So when Israel goes into Gaza and levels the whole place, at last count, it was up around 30,000 people. You start to see that something else is at play. This is not just striking back. This is not just an eye for an eye. There's something else at work here. Right? They want that land. They're going to take that land. And this is an opportunity for them to do that. And this looks like what they're doing. That would not be just cause. That would not be within the just war theory because it's not proportional to the attack on you. Right? They're not discriminating very well. The indiscriminate and disproportionate nature of nuclear weapons, for example, the destructive capability, poses a fundamental challenge to these ethical criteria. And that suggests that there's moral incongruity with when you use weapons, not just nuclear weapons, but when you, like Israel seems to have done here. It seems like that their response has been more than it should be. And that's just my opinion. Now, stewardship and creation care, I'll call it. So our theology, this doctrine of stewardship emphasizes humanity's responsibility to care for and preserve God's creation. The potential environmental catastrophe that would be posed by nuclear warfare directly contradicts the divine mandate, and it calls into question again the ethical legitimacy of maintaining arsenals that are capable of such ecological and human devastation. Now, another point though, after the Tower of Babel, when God confused the languages and forced the people to disperse, to go be fruitful and prosper elsewhere, because God's providential design there was for nations. It was for separate, disparate, diverse groups of people around the world. Because as you look back through history, that's what has restrained evil, was keeping people separate in nations. Not only that, it has also caused progress, because as nations built up their technologies to make better weapons, they also created better technologies and improved the standard of living for the people in their nations. Some did. Anyway, that's kind of the story in the United States. Our technology rose as our preeminence in the world did. So we talked about that in the last episode too. Now, eschatology, the doctrine of the last things, deals with, this is the ultimate destiny of the world, a future-oriented perspective on the issue of nuclear weapons here. So our blessed hope is Christ will return. There'll be a new creation where righteousness dwells and war is no more. And this informs our theological critique of nuclear armament as antithetical to the promised future God has for the world. Now, also I would say, though, that what you'll hear, and it's the truth, the reason we have so many nuclear weapons is to ensure that nuclear war doesn't happen. And that happens to be the case, but that shows you what a paradox. What a paradox that is. That's how man does things. That's man's design for the world. We're going to keep the peace by building up massive weapons. You see, this is how you can see the depraved mind at work. Now, let's think about in our theology of nuclear war. Let's think about, let's just use Isaiah 54. Isaiah 54. specifically verses 16 and 17. Let's look at verse 17 first. We'll come back to 16 in a moment. Verse 17 says, "No weapon that is fashioned against you shall succeed, and you shall refute every tongue that rises against you in judgment. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication from me, declares the Lord." Now, in the prophetic landscape of the Old Testament, Isaiah is a towering figure. It conveys God's messages of judgment, hope, and redemption. And central to Isaiah's prophecy is the assurance of God's sovereign control over history and the nations. So keep this in mind as we think about nuclear weapons, because they're not here because God wasn't paying attention. They're here only because God has allowed it. So as we think about themes of God's sovereignty, the ravager, this term, the ravager, that we see in some translations, you see it here this is an ESV version here. In the King James Version, it's called the waster. It's called the waster in the KJV. So the prophet Isaiah presents a God who is unparalleled in power, absolutely sovereign, absolutely power, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, everything. He's unparalleled in power, authority, sovereign over creation and history. And it's evident in passages where God is depicted as the creator of the heavens and earth. Also in Isaiah 40:28. And where the nations are called to account, Isaiah 41:1, and it determines the course of history, Isaiah 46:10. Isaiah's message overall reveals a God who is actively involved in his creation, the only God who is sovereign, who's guiding the destinies of nations and individuals alike. Now let's go back and let's read verse 16 as well. "Behold, I have created, says the Lord. I have created the smith who blows the fire of coals." So he creates the one who builds the tools. "I have created the smith who blows the fire of coals and produces a weapon for its purpose. I've also created the ravager to destroy." So God created. He has created Kim Jong-un. It's not, Kim Jong-un isn't there because the devil created him. He's there because God has created him. And if God so chooses, he can use Kim Jong-un and his weapons as a rod against his own people or some other nation, which is something that God has done in the past. "I have created the ravager to destroy." Verse 17, "No weapon that is fashioned against you shall succeed, and you shall refute every tongue that rises against you in judgment. And this is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication from me, declares the Lord." The ravager, or the waster in the KJV, is often understood as a symbol of the forces of destruction and chaos, including oppressive nations like Assyria. Assyria was used, literally the language is, as a rod against Israel. And Babylon as well was used as a judgment against Israel. But they're shown to be under God's ultimate control. They're not rogue, right? And insofar as they're being influenced by Satan, always remember, Satan is God's devil. He can't do anything apart from God allowing it, apart from God not intervening. Go back and read Job if you have a problem with that. Isaiah 10:5 and 6 refers to Assyria as the rod of God's anger, employed by God to discipline his people for their unfaithfulness. So we have these nuclear weapons in the world. We have the possibility of a grid down scenario. I would say this would be a great time to call people to repentance, rather than trying to flex our muscles, trying to worry about exposing darkness in every corner of the world. This is a good time to call people to repentance if we want to avoid some kind of wrath. But also, this same passage assures that this instrument of wrath itself will be judged, right? So, like Assyria and Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, and they were all judged also. They were used to judge, and they were judged. Isaiah 10:12, illustrating that all powers, no matter how destructive, operate within the bounds of God's sovereign will. That includes nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons operate within the bounds of God's sovereign will. So let's think about in a theological context. Isaiah's assurances are rooted in the covenantal relationship between God and his people. And now that what his people means, consummated in Christ. So all those who are in Christ are God's people. The promise of protection and victory are contingent upon the people's relationship with God, being in Christ. And that's what emphasizes the faithfulness and trust. That emphasizes faithfulness and trust in God. Now, the historical backdrop of Assyrian and Babylonian threats helps to contextualize God's promises. These assurances were given in times of political turmoil and national insecurity, much like what we have before us today. And they serve as reminders of God's larger redemptive plan, his redemptive plan for redemptive history for his people. Now, the text, the literary features of the text, Isaiah's use of imagery, like the weapon and the ravager, this will make concrete some of these abstract realities of spiritual warfare and divine protection. See, we don't want to get too far off into spiritual warfare and forget the fact that we're here in this world. We're still in the flesh. We're still in this world. The prophetic promises employ poetic devices also to communicate God's supremacy and the assured victory of his people. So for an Israelite reading this in Isaiah's day, some 700 years before Christ, this would make perfect sense. All the allusions, the poetic nature, the literary features would all make perfect sense. Now, Isaiah 54. No weapon that is fashioned against you or formed against you shall succeed. In short, God is promising that whatever trials and suffering we must endure, our security will be found in him. I've said it 25 times already. God is sovereign, absolutely in control, in charge. This is his creation. The universe and everything in it is created and upheld by Jesus Christ, actually, by the second person of the Trinity. You can see that in Hebrews 3. God is sovereign, meaning that chance plays no role in redemptive history at all. If a nuclear war was to happen, it would not happen because God blinked. It would happen because that is exactly what was going to happen. In fact, chance and God are mutually exclusive. If one exists, the other cannot. If chance has no power, it has no creative power at all. Chance it's for mathematics and probabilities. Chance doesn't create anything. If chance exists, God does not exist. Therefore, chance does not exist. God is in control of everything that happens either by his primary or secondary causation. God determines every outcome, and mankind has free will. But that free will is enslaved to sin. Jesus says this in John 8:34. Everyone who commits sin is the slave of sin, and that's everybody. Romans 6:18. You have been set free from sin and have become slaves to righteousness. So that's the new man. When you're in Christ, you become slaves to righteousness. You're not a slave to sin anymore. So it's clear there are only two options for any person. You can be a slave to sin and you can boast in your free will, or you can be a slave to Christ. The free will that libertarians, politically, libertarians and anarchists idolize is just slavery. It's just another kind of slavery. A real plot twist, right? That's a real plot twist for all those who come to faith, to find out that this free will that I have thought so long was true liberty, it's slavery. Remember, we said the other night that the spirit of 1776 is liberty from tyrants, and the spirit of 1789, which is the French Revolution, Enlightenment principles, is freedom to do whatever I like. Freedom from tyrants, or freedom to do whatever I like. John 8:36. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Free from what? Free from bondage to slavery. The only freedom in the universe, the only freedom available in the universe is slavery to Christ. Let me say it again. The only true freedom, the only true liberty available in the universe is slavery to Christ. So take that, George Orwell. Either God directly intervenes in the affairs of his creatures for their good and his glory, or the evil intentions of men and the devil ultimately work for the good of God's people and his glory. There are no other possibilities. That's it. Now let's apply that to Isaiah 54:17. No weapon that is fashioned against you shall succeed. The reason God can promise such a thing is because of what you read in verse 16 right above it. Context is king. Verse 16, behold, I have created the smith who blows the fire of coals and produces a weapon for its purpose. I've also created the ravager or the waster, depending on your translation, to destroy. The sovereign God who created the blacksmith, who makes the weapons, who created the ravager, the destroyer, to destroy, also protects. So whatever weapon is raised against God's people will eventually be destroyed itself. That same applies to criticism or false accusation. You can see because it says here, you shall refute every tongue that rises against you in judgment. So those who criticize you, make false accusations about you. Remember in 1 Peter 3:15 where we saw here a moment ago, but in your hearts honor Christ, the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. Sometimes the Lord intervenes directly to take the weapon away from the enemy of his servants. Sometimes God allows the evil intentions of men to use the weapon against his people. But the pain of the immediate blow is far less than the good that comes from it. Now I want you to think about that in the context of grid down scenario. 90% of the people die. Nuclear annihilation. Nuclear Armageddon. What God is telling us here is the pain of the immediate blow, no matter how bad it is far less. There's no comparison to the good that will come from it for God's people, for those who love God. In this sense, the weapon never prospers. The violent sword, the nuclear weapons are transformed into a trowel. The weapon is transformed into a tool or instrument for the building of Christ's kingdom. Now, how about that for a little bit of a message? How in the world could nuclear weapons be used to build Christ's kingdom? Because the sovereignty of God. Primary and secondary causes. God doesn't push any buttons. God lets evil creatures do what they will, knowing through the doctrine of predestination that things have already been determined. That whatever it seems like this evil act is doing at this moment, all it's doing is furthering God's plan for redemptive history. Summer and I watched a show last night, and it dealt with the idea of a time traveler, someone who kept coming back into the past And there was an operation. They were running an operation to kill people who were responsible, whose children and grandchildren in the future were responsible for doing something that was going to bring about the end of the world. So it's interesting to see that kind of concept played out on the screen like that, because, heart of man, we're Ecclesiastes 3:11, God has put eternity on our hearts. Romans 1, everyone knows God exists. Everyone knows his righteous decree, but we all suppress it to different degrees in unrighteousness. But you see it pop up there, right? You see this idea of that our actions cause horrible things to happen. And then you see the corruption of the idea, the disordered ambition in that show, the idea that perhaps if we could go back in time and kill Hitler and his family who created him, things would be better. Well, back to the text here. The tongue is, as you see here in verse 17, you shall refute every tongue that rises against you. The tongue is often a sharper weapon than even a nuclear weapon. Bearing the blow of a weapon sometimes is easier than enduring the insult or a false accusation, because wounds heal, but psychological damage from accusation, slander, and deception remains long after. The PSYOPs division at Fort Bragg here in North Carolina, that's their motto. It's because wounds heal, because physical wounds heal, right? The PSYOPs division, they do psychological warfare. The weapons of our persecutors and oppressors might be permitted for a while, and they might appear to prosper, but they will gain nothing of ultimate value, because their attacks are guided and restrained by the secret purpose of God. Secret only in the sense that God is a timeless, uncreated, unapproachable being, but not secret in the sense that we know what the purpose for redemptive history is. Our persecutors and oppressors will have the means and methods to destroy the church, but their efforts will be in vain and fruitless. But the Lord permits them to prevail and prosper, even to a great extent, perhaps even to annihilate whole nations or whole sections of the earth. But trials are the believer's training ground for faith and spiritual maturity. James, chapter 1, 2, all of James, the first half of James. So this is life preparation for the life to come. This is not the end. But when God sees fit, according to his purpose, he will strip them of their power and their prosperity. Isaiah's message to God's people, emphasizing God's control, the limitation of adversarial powers, and the promise of protection, resonates with contemporary believers when we see the world around us. It encourages faith and trust in God's sovereign plan, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. The promise that no weapon formed against you will succeed, that invites believers to live in peace. You can live in peace because of Isaiah 54, for one example. John 15 also, where you see persecution is a guarantee. But Isaiah 54, 16 and 17, and other sections in Isaiah as well, really should serve as an encouragement to you to live in confidence, to know that don't fret. Don't fear man. Don't fear the New World Order. Don't fear this global movement. Don't fear the move for planetism. Don't fear it. Don't be nervous. Don't be anxious. Don't let that rile you up, because that is an act of unbelief. To do that is to doubt God, is to doubt his sovereignty. To do that is to disbelieve what God has said already in Romans 8:28. The old standby there. Start at 16. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And when we're in so much pain, we don't even know what to say. It's okay. The Spirit intercedes for you. And he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. In verse 28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So this is encouraging. It invites us all to believe, to live in the confidence and the peace of God's ultimate victory over evil, and to live in the assurance of his protective care. So this is a profound perspective on God's sovereignty. And I wanted to share that with you tonight. I think in the interest of time, I'll hold this biblical perspective on preparedness. We've already done it, so I might hold back on it now since we're right at an hour and a half. That's good. Armor of Truth Live number 270. You'll see there in that show, you'll see a biblical perspective on preparedness, written by Jonathan Hollerman, written by the gentleman you saw in the opening clip, where he takes some of the common proof texts that people used to say you shouldn't get involved. You shouldn't be prepping because that's unbelief. That's doubting that God will provide for you. So this is excellent. So check out Armor of Truth Live number 270. I've done it somewhere else in there too. Or, you can go to griddownconsulting.com. Let me show you that right quick too, so you'll know where that is. How about this guy right here?
Billions and billions and billions and...
All right, so I'll just show you Grid Down. If I can spell it. Yeah, so if you go to griddownconsulting.com, definitely go there. Check out Jonathan Hollerman's books. There he is. Survival Theory 2 is out now. Deputy Director, U.S. Task Force on National and Homeland Security, #1 best-selling author on preparedness, President of Grid Down Consulting. And if you go on his website here, if you want him to consult with you on how to set up how to prepare, that's what he does. Right here, if you go to the research tab, you go down to the biblical perspective on preparedness. It's excellent. I love this because what he does is he takes some of the common proof texts used for people who will tell you that you shouldn't prepare. You shouldn't prep because you're doubting God when you do that. No, in fact, God has told us to prepare. He's told us to be smart, to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. For example, I'll just give you this. 1 Timothy 5:8. We shared this here, talking about the border crisis. So many coming across the border, and then they're telling you need to take care of these people. You need to make sure they have money and food and places to stay. No, you don't. No, you don't, because in many cases, these are not really people struggling. They're not really asylum seekers at all. We know what's going on here. We'll get into that right now. But no, your call in 1 Timothy 5:8, anyone who does not provide for their relatives and especially their own household has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So we've got a video here on the channel too. If you want to see the biblical case on charity, it's a short video. Be easy enough for you to check out. The biblical case on preparedness is, it's not a live show, it's right here. Right there. 3 videos down, you see Dusty Devers, you see the bombshell, UFO. And then you see guilty. Joe Biden, migrant crisis. Biden's migrant crisis and the rules of Christian charity. You can check that one out there. That deals with 1 Timothy 5:8. We're called as Christians to take care of and feed those who can't take care of themselves. But it starts with our family and then the church. And then when those things are taken care of, then other people. Then we can take care of other people. Help as many as you can without sacrificing the safety and provisions of your immediate family. So I would definitely encourage you to check out griddownconsulting.com and read Jonathan Hollerman's biblical perspective on preparedness. Let me remind you while we're still here, folks, if you would, please take a minute now to just hit the thumbs up, if you would, on this video. If you want to hit the thumbs down, that's fine too. It's all the same to us. And if you didn't like it, fair enough. But hit the thumbs up. Take a moment to like the video, share it, leave us a comment. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to this channel and please ask other people to do it. You wouldn't believe how hard it is based on the kind of message that we present here, how hard it is just to get the videos viewed. YouTube keeps this channel hidden. But more than anything, folks, download this Armor of Truth mobile app. When you download the app, it's free. It's never going to cost you anything. It's always going to be 100% free. You're going to get live notifications and a direct link whenever and wherever we go live. You also get exclusive content. You get immediate access to our articles. You'll get reports and resources, extra podcast material. Bible study podcasts are there for you now. We've got a series in the book of James going right now. If you can support Armor of Truth financially, please know that every donation of any amount, $1, makes a huge difference for us. All of it matters, folks, and we need your help more than ever. Because as you can tell, we're not getting the exposure that a lot of channels or ministries get. We're kind of different. If you hadn't noticed, we're a little different than most of them. You can use the Armor of Truth mobile app Give tab, or you can visit our website, armoroftruth.net/donate, or follow the links in the description under this here video. Set up a recurring monthly donation if you can, because that helps us plan for the future of Armor of Truth. So what are you waiting for? Download the Armor of Truth mobile app now. So again, my name's Brad, and I am missing my talented, precious, and lovely wife, Summer. She's not here with us on the show tonight, but she will be back with us shortly. But together we're Armor of Truth, and we're seeking a worldview revolution through God's revelation. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you next time.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth, live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on. armoroftruth.net.